So Heek and I are wanting to lay out what we have ideas for as far as the basics for the mandate's abilities. The idea being that as we set up the rules for their limitations and in what circumstances they can use their powers, we can go back to this and see what we wanted them to be able to do. Um, that way, when we come up with, oh, we could have this limitation, we can see how that would work against certain circumstances of them being able to use their powers to certain means, right?
Okay.
So we do have a list together, and we plan on adding and removing from this list as time goes on. Uh, making sure that it stays up to date with our current ideas and removing things if they, are too hard to keep in line with what we're thinking. So this isn't a final list, this is just what we're thinking of at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so first off, we have far step. The ability to step far distances by changing the amount of space in between. Some might think, as Heek did originally, but that's just normal walking. Um, but it's not, and I realize that that's supposed to be a joke, but the idea being that you could fold the space between you and the location that you want to go to, and then touch the matter at the other end, whether it be, the idea being that it would have to be solid rather than just the air, and then pull yourself through that fold that you did, and then you'd be at the new location. Um, and there are a couple of different ways that you'd have to be able to do this. We were debating whether or not you'd have to have the exact coordinates of it or if it was just the idea. Now, we have decided that uh, you have to know the distance between the two locations. So you can't just be told, oh, there's a spaceship that you have to go to and see a picture of it and be able to go there. You have to know the relative distance between you and the location that you want to go to because you're
So if you
having
don't
to
know where
physically
you are,
scroll
you
it.
can't do it properly. And if you don't know where your location is, you can't do it properly. But
Right,
you could also just go like 50 meters in that direction to get away from something.
right. So if you don't know where you are, you could easily just go, okay, I'm going to go, through the planet and, try and end up somewhere where you might know where you are to try and take it out of a bad situation.
Right.
So that's kind of the idea. You have to know where you're going, and if you don't, you just physically can't do it. There's no space to bend. Unlike Jumper, where you'll just end up in bad situations. So,
Okay, moving on.
yep. So the ability to change the speed of time, not stopping or reversing it. Now this was like a contention point between Heek and I for a little bit, because he was assuming that I meant that they'd be able to undo actions or go back in time to change certain events.
My
And
thing was, as soon as you give any character that power, nothing has stakes anymore.
right, so
There's
that's
literally
kind of a
nothing matters.
problem because then you don't end up with any, real meaning to consequences. They could go back and do it again and bypass the consequences. Unless there's a huge consequence to time travel, which we're not really wanting in this scenario.
I mean, there would be mental trauma of seeing that thing happen, but
That's really,
the
really hard to quantify.
right,
So,
and it's also really hard to pull off and make convincing.
right. So the idea being they'd be able to speed up the time in an area to where they have more time than their opponents to think about a task or a problem, or they'd be able to slow down time for a projectile, giving them time to dodge it or to deflect it, rather than having to physically stop the projectile. Say it was a huge enough projectile like a meteorite or a planet, instead of having to physically stop the projectile or deflect it that way, they could slow down time, say for a planet in a region, or slow down time for the entire thing, and it would be enough to slow it down and allow everybody to get out of the way. Or for bullets, they could have a area in front of them where time is slower, giving them time to move out of the way of the bullets.
Wouldn't you be speeding up time around the bomb?
What bomb? I didn't mention a bomb.
No, like the one that they're getting away from the explosion.
I didn't mention an explosion.
Hold on, I misheard you.
Okay, so a projectile, like, you've got bullets
No,
or
like
a
before
meteorite.
that.
You would speed up time in your area so you could think faster than your opponents.
No, after that.
But I went from that to projectiles.
Okay, whatever. Wouldn't
Okay,
you speed up the time of the projectile to make it go slower?
no, that would make it go faster.
No, that would be slowing its time.
Yeah,
Because if
y-
time is going slower, everything else around you. If time is going slower, you're going faster. So whatever you're affecting is going faster. And if time is going faster, you're going
no,
slower. So whatever you're
oh
affecting is
my
going
gosh, this is
slower.
so ridiculous. You slow down time around the projectile to where everything around it is going faster, so you can get out of its way.
I feel like this is a problem we're gonna have to figure out later.
Yeah, because we both have like really hard times grasping time speed because it ends up being just
That
vast
is the
amounts of
general
relativeness.
concept.
It's just
But
vast
that is
amounts
the
of
general
relative
consensus.
calculations, and it's like I cannot do this in my head.
It's like faster or slower.
Right,
Hold
that's all it
on.
amounts to. But like this is going faster, so then everything around it's going slower, which means it's technically going slower there too. So what are you talking about? Okay,
Yeah.
anyway, let's move on. Now this is kind of related, but it would give a different option from time, the ability to change the speed of plant growth. Um, so they'd be able to alter the biological processes of organic matter to,
Or just do the processes for them.
or do the processes for them to speed up their growth. So say a tree, it would be able to provide it the sunlight and the energy to allow it to grow faster and in the direction that it wanted. Or like with an apple, it would be able to do the same, even if it wasn't attached to the tree anymore. Those kinds of things, like where uh, it's limited by its own biological clock and the amount of energy that it has, and also the amount of matter. They'd be able to bypass those limits. They'd be able to speed up its own biological clock. So, I don't think there's much else to say on that point. That one's pretty basic, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, granting things partial sentience, also known as Golomancy. Um, this is kind of an interesting one, as it also kind of relates to the previous one in that it's a life skill. Life skill in that it uses life magic, not life skill as in you need to learn this to live on your own. Um, so you'd be able to grant physical objects such as desks or mounds of stone or walls partial sentience in order to accomplish a task. Now, he made a good point about it being limited to the point where you wouldn't consider them conscious. It would be more like a computer, where you could give it a task and it would be able to accomplish that task. But once it came across a situation where it didn't know what to do, it wouldn't be able to do anything. It would just sit there, staring at the problem, unless you gave it a way to handle what it didn't know what to do. So let's
Right.
say you told it to walk in a straight line until it hit a wall. Well, you told it to walk in a straight line. That's all it knows how to do. But it'll stop once it hits a wall. Pretty simple. Well, what happens when it hits a person? It has no idea what to do. So then you'd have to add another qualifier. If you hit a living thing, punch it. So it'll punch through living things and stop when it hits a wall. Um, so it'll punch through trees, cats, dogs, people, buffalo, cows, um, grass. Like, just imagine this giant stone wooden monster just like mowing through a field because it hasn't hit a wall yet.
And then it just encounters Born and is like, oh, okay.
Yep, and then it just collapses into rubble. Looks like a broken building. So yeah, that's kind of the idea. It would only be able to do tasks as long as it
Now,
has logic.
does a fence qualify as a wall?
See, and that would be the kind of thing that's up to that mandate's definition of wall. And
Yeah.
then the mandate would go like, wait, does a fence count as a wall? As the
And then
like
it's
golem's
like,
coming up to a
is it a
fence, and then the Golem's just sitting there like, do I go forward? Do I stop? Do I go forward? Do I stop? Do I go forward? Do I stop?
It's like, is it one of those white picket fences with the spaces in between, or is it a solid fence of wood with no openings? Is it one of the ones that's just like wood sticks put together? Is it a wire fence? Is it a chain link fence? Do any of these change if it is defined as a wall or not?
Right. So those are kind of the logic traps that I'm really wanting to get into with this and another point that we're going to talk about later. Um, anything else to say on that one?
Uh, they wouldn't be able to achieve the form of sentience to ask, "Do I need right? Or do I deserve rights?" Which, in my opinion, is when a sentience becomes sentient and dissolves right.
Yeah, but I could also tell my computer to print out "Do I deserve rights?" So, you know.
Yes, but then that's not the computer's thought.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
computer has not generated that.
I could make it generate that from a code.
Okay, the computer has not
I get your
done that
point.
with a full understanding of its meaning.
I get your point. But then the question becomes, what if it doesn't understand the concept of rights? Because you just never taught it that. Like, we legitimately have humans that don't know what it is to have a right to do something. So, that's a little bit of a catch 22, but I feel like we're getting a little bit off topic.
Yes, off topic.
Okay, so the next topic would be that is on topic, moving protons, neutrons, and electrons to change elements. So this is going to be one of the basics of their powers that I don't think we're going to stray from very much.
Yeah.
They will be able to alter, uh, well, they'll be able to tear apart an element or an object to its base components of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and then at a certain point down to quarks, to where they can rebuild the protons, neutrons, and electrons. And then rebuild it into a different element to where they can, take a wooden desk and, turn it into carbon or steel or air if they so pleased, because they have the ability to do that. They'd be able to do the same things with molecules. They wouldn't have to do it proton, neutron, and electron based. They'd be able to just do it by molecule. It saves one step at least. Um, and then it also saves another problem that we're running into where we don't know what happens when they split those. So we don't know what happens when they split an atom or what happens to the energy when they split molecules, because obviously energy is released when that happens. Are they able to collect said energy? Does it affect them in certain ways? We still got to figure that out. When they split an atom, do you have to be powerful enough to collect that energy and fast enough to prevent it from damaging anything? Or is it just something that mandates can do inherently? So that is something that we need feedback on. Right, Heek?
Yes.
So those are the problems that we currently see with that one, but it's something we're desperately wanting to be able to do because of the visual effects that we can do with it, as far as them being able to take a material from their pocket and turn it into a couple of other different things that have different functions, as well as the versatility of a power like that being able to transform different types of matter into others for different purposes. Anything else to say on that one?
No.
Okay. Now the next one is very, very similar to the previous one. In fact, I can't really see them going one without the other. Change the crystal structure of objects, changing steel to tempered steel. Now the idea behind this is just because a mandate has carbon doesn't mean it's the useful form of carbon. It could very well be graphite. So they need to be able to change how the molecules have formed to be able to make any use out of this new material that they formed.
Right. There's
Um,
a bit more to turning graphite into, say, perfect carbon. You have to remove impurities, but they'd be able to do that easily as well.
right,
It's
with the
just they'd
previous
be
one.
slight byproduct.
Right. Particularly since they can just change the crystal structure not to accept any impurities, they'd fall out, change it back into what they want, and it'd be pure. So,
Right.
I don't think there's really much to say on that one. they'd have to understand the crystal structure of what they're making. They wouldn't just be able to do it because if they've never seen the material before. They could do it if they've seen like a model of it, or if they've had it explained to them well enough that they could understand it. But if
Or
they've
if they've
never,
just used it enough to where they can figure it out on their own.
right, so like if they're just sitting there experimenting with like glass, for example, they could figure out how to make tempered glass. They could figure it out, but they wouldn't just be able to go, oh my gosh, I know what tempered glass is, makes tempered glass. Or,
Right, things like glass would be a bit more difficult for them to make because it's not a consistent pattern across all of it.
right, but it would be something they could do. And that's
Right, it's
one
just
of the
like,
reasons I was using it as an example because it's difficult.
right, things like glass would be more difficult than, say, perfect carbon or even carbon nanotubes.
Right. Okay, so the next one would be move parts of matter from a distance, telekinesis. Now, this is kind of the base for the previous 2 points, as it's what they're using to move the parts of the matter at that small of a scale, but they'd also be able to move matter at a large scale. So instead of targeting each proton, neutron, atom, molecule at that level, they could just target the entirety of the object. Um, the scale that they can target at is based on how small they can imagine the object. So if they can imagine the molecule of the object and its exact positioning within the object, then they can target that. If they can imagine the entirety of the object as one piece, then they can move the entirety of the object. So that's kind of the point there. So it makes it easy for them to draw lines through an object and tear it there by pushing the two lines apart. Um, versus like just having to rip it in half by targeting two sides of the object. They'd be able to do a lot more precision work than your general telekinesis. Right?
Yes.
Any points on that?
Also, it's telekinetic.
I wasn't saying like the
Somebody who
general.
has telekinesis.
I know, but I wasn't saying the general person. I was saying the power.
Oh,
Yeah. So either way would have worked, but yeah, I see your point. So the next one is the ability to define rules around objects and circumstances. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier, where I had mentioned that I wanted to do a lot of logic traps based on the definitions and based on the definitions that the mandates hold over what they see, and how they define certain things when they're casting their rules, or their tasks for their golems. So, for example, a mandate could walk into a room and say, nobody is allowed to breathe in this room, right? But then they have to define breathing, and they have to define nobody in that statement. I'm being a little bit
right.
specific, but it makes more sense than other ones. Like nobody's allowed to drink pop. Well, now you have to define pop. What if the person who is
Nobody's
drinking
allowed to drink soda.
right, what if the person who's drinking the pop doesn't define it as pop? What if they define it as soda?
And then if you also include soda, what if they're drinking a cold drink?
What
Oh,
if they're drinking a fizzy one? You know,
yes.
what do you call it? Um, so then instead
Does
of
high
basing
C
it
count as pop?
right, and then instead of basing it on the word, you'd base it on their concept of the word.
Right,
Um,
and it would vary from mandate
mandate
to
to
mandate.
mandate.
For
Right.
example, one mandate might consider high C pop, another one might not because it's not carbonated.
So what would end up happening is if you weren't allowed to drink pop in that room, one mandate would be drinking high C, and the other one would go, "Awesome! I thought high C was a pop. I can drink it." And then he starts drinking it, and he gets punished because he broke the rule because he sees it
Well,
as a pop.
no, I think it would be more so the mandate who set the rule, their definition.
Okay, I guess that kind of makes more sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Now there are a couple of other points to bring up here as well with the rules. We haven't quite figured out how to make it cost. We don't want somebody to just be able to walk into a room and say, nobody is allowed to exist here, or anybody that comes into this room dies, because that's quite a powerful rule. There has to be a cost for them setting these rules. Now, the primary reason that I'm wanting them to be able to set rules is to balance out their powers. It gives each mandate somewhat of a power or an ability to defend against the other mandates, right?
Right. And also makes the strongest mandate in the room the one that you know nothing about.
Right, because you don't know what their rules are and you don't know what abilities they like to use.
Right, so you don't know what to set your rules to.
Right. So, we've kind of thought that it's going to be a general energy that they all share and convert to and from. Um,
Hmm.
but there are vastly different options as well. Could be material goods. It could be a physical energy that you have to use. So you could have differing energies that, dependent on the mandate that cast it, have different efficiencies. So, I mean, there are a lot of different options as far as what you could use as an energy system. We're still debating that, and I think that's a video we're going to do here soon. Um, so as far as that goes, what we're going to do to define the cost once we figure out what it costs is you'll set a rule. Anybody that walks, or you can't, if you walk into this room, you die, right? No. What's a better example? Oh, you're not allowed to walk into this room. Okay? Let's go with
Okay.
that one. Now, in order to like that's a very very black and white rule. You just can't walk into the room. You physically cannot. That rule would be nearly impossible because it has no space limit. Well, I guess it does have a space limit.
Well, no. You, there's no limit or set in that rule.
You can't walk into this room.
Yes, but it doesn't say that the rule only applies to this room.
Okay. Well, by Higgs definition, it has no space limit. It has no time limit. Um, so it applies to any room the mandate applies it to at any point in time, at any point in space, and it applies to everyone anywhere. They're not allowed to walk into this room. Okay. Um, so I guess you could
It is,
say that it would be the mandate, the room that the mandate's standing in.
right, and that sort of rule would be essentially impossible for anybody to do.
Right. Particularly a single person. Now, you could say do a rule like that if you had a bunch of mandates together, particularly high level ones such as gods and uh, elementals that we'll get into later. But it would be essentially impossible.
Right,
So,
what you would need to do is A, set a punishment. That would be the main thing. You have to set punishments for your rules instead of just you cannot do this. Right, you
right,
can do a rule that's you cannot do this, but it's abhorrently expensive.
right. So,
The
what you would
idea.
have to do is you can't, if you step into this room, you die. Now, that would also be expensive because the qualifier you set is extreme, or severe. The punishment for stepping into that room is extremely severe. So, a better punishment that would reduce the cost by more would be if you step into this room, you fart or you spurt pasta sauce out of your nose or something like that. That would be a lot less because, people could get past that. They'd be able to step into the room. Um, it would be something that would be possible to bypass. Anything that's impossible to bypass without a severe punishment would be really expensive. And the more possible it becomes to bypass, the more cheap it is, or the cheaper it
Right,
is.
like you cannot walk into this room through this door.
Right. Then you could, say, bust down the wall or come through a window or tunnel underneath it.
Right,
Then
or
you're
you cannot walk into this room through this door at this time of day if your name starts with J.
right. Then it would be extremely cheap, and you're targeting a very specific group of people. And it would be extremely easy to bypass. Just change your name or come through at a different time of day or come in a different location. You know, there are a lot of ways to bypass the rule. The more ways
Right,
you make to bypass your rule, the cheaper it is. Now, the
and it
other,
costs to put the rule up originally and then costs to and it's like a light bulb where you put a large lump sum in and then you pay some as you go just to maintain it.
right, And the maintenance cost would be qualified by other rules or other things that the mandate had done beforehand, like infrastructure they may have set up with other rules or with tools that they have created by people like Hephaestus.
Right, and if, say, they're not knocked out, the rule would go away unless they've bound it to something.
Right, such as a tool or another living being.
Right, and binding it to something takes a lot of time and generally can't be done instant or spontaneously, and you need premonition.
Oh,
That's
it's
not the right
forethought.
word.
You need forethought.
Yeah, you need forethought and time to do it beforehand.
Right. I think we've covered everything on rules. It's a pretty lengthy topic, and honestly, it could probably use its own video.
Yeah,
But we wanted to get that idea out there in this basic setup.
yeah,
Um,
because it's going to be pretty important.
right, and we wanted to get some discussion on it because it's important and it's going to be the main balancer we use. So the next one we mentioned in the previous one with gods and elementals, and we've mentioned a couple of times before, particularly in the Hephaestus page, ability to transcend humanity. Extremely vague, I know. Um, but the idea is there are different levels to what you can become as a mandate. Um, so you'll be in just a basic mandate at the beginning where you have a couple of inherent abilities where you just understand it so much that you just know how to do it without having to understand the physics or the math behind it. And
And
then
these levels are rough and or really just
mostly arbitrary.
labels that the other mandates will put on you.
Right, and they're mostly arbitrary. You can't decide to be
Yes.
one yourself, but there are definitions of what would make you one. Um, but
And the
like
definitions are mostly, do other mandates consider you this?
Right. But for example, for elementals, there's a very specific one.
Right.
But the key point is that they kind of show your power level, and they would show how much time you've put into learning
Is it over
specific tasks.
9,000?
No. Um,
Are you sure?
so, for example, just a regular mandate that has just started off would have very specific skills in one area, whereas a master would have at least competency in all areas, right?
Yes.
And then a very specific skill set in one area. So you would be competent in one area as a regular mandate, say technomancy or gallomancy, but then as you went into becoming a master, you'd have to learn competency in all areas and a specific skill in a couple or one area. Agreed?
I guess.
I mean, you wouldn't have to have a specific ability, but it would make it more clear that you are a master because you've mastered one ability and have competency everywhere else.
Yeah.
So then after master, you have two path options. You can either go and become an elemental, which has a very specific definition, and a god, which has a very specific definition. The first two ones are very arbitrary, and you can slip in and out of them as time goes on.
Feel like we
Um,
need another option for if you choose to master everything.
yeah, probably. Where you just didn't become a god. Someone like Hephaestus, where he's mastered most everything and just hasn't, you know, decided to go anywhere further. We'll see.
Hmm.
Um, So, an elemental, its main defining characteristic is that they just cannot be considered human anymore. They don't have a body, they don't age, they don't require resources at all, and they almost cannot be killed. So,
And they have little to no humanity left.
right, and we would define humanity as anything that would
Compassion.
compassion, empathy, emotion. Um, they really only care about crafting with their element and existing. They don't want to die because they've spent so much time and energy becoming who they are.
Right. And it would be possible for them to have emotion, but it would be like watered down and
Right.
very distant.
And it's because they've spent so much time focusing on this task and they've lost so much along the way.
Right.
And it's not impossible for them to learn it again. It's not impossible for them to change, but they wouldn't be able to do it by themselves.
It would be
And
a very lengthy process.
right. And then the other direction would be gods. Now, this definitely deserves a video of its own, and it's something we've recently started discussing, so we want to get it a little bit more nailed down. But we're thinking of a pantheon, similar to the Greek one, but instead of choosing skills, you would choose things like objects and tasks. So you could be the god of
or
aluminum,
thing,
right?
right? Or just like basic elements. Like you couldn't be the god of fire or death,
Right. So
but those would be very high level.
you would be the god of aluminum or plastic or water bottles, or you could be the god of winemaking, but it wouldn't be similar to how the Greeks did it. It would be you would have the ability to craft winemaking tools. You wouldn't be able to make wine appear out of nowhere like the Greeks did. It would be
I mean, you would be able to do that just with base mandate powers,
right. It wouldn't be like you can do that because you're that god. It's
right?
because like you would be
It's
better
because
at
of
it.
your or inherent understanding of wine,
Right. You'd be better at it. You could say make better tasting wine, but you wouldn't be doing it because you're that god.
right? Or imbue the wine with magic,
Right. So, um, I don't really want to go too in depth on the gods because we haven't really nailed down a lot of it yet.
right? But
But that's the basic idea. We're kind of going with a
yeah,
Greek pantheon with a little bit of a twist.
and
Um,
what you need to do is either kill a god or convince one to make you a sub god of them,
right. And the reason they'd want to do that is because it would prevent them from being killed the more subgods they have. At least make it
right?
harder. That's as much as we figured out, I think. It's just there's a few more specifics that we're still kind of nitpicking about.
Right, and it should get its own video.
Is there anything else you can think of?
No,
Okay, so we hope to get this out by tomorrow or tonight. Today is the 2nd, so yell at me if I don't. Um, and we should have a couple more out this week as long as this one works out. This is the third time we've recorded this. So
technically fourth if you count the 2 times we tried to do it the first time.
yeah, so we're kind of getting frustrated at this point. We'll see how it
Yeah,
goes, and I hope everybody likes this format. I really don't know. If you have any feedback, let us know, and please let us know what you think about the ideas we brought up today. It will really, really help. Have a nice night, and I will see you next time.